Welcome to the Digital Agency Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Englander. Raul, great to have you on the show.
Excited to be here, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and you are in sunny San Diego, and I'm in sunny New York, which is a nice spring day. So not too much to complain about.
Coast to coast.
Yeah, coast to coast. Exactly. I need to make it back out to SD before long. Nobody says SD. Everybody says SF or LA, but you don't hear SD as much. I don't know why that is. But anyway.
That's interesting. No, it's always San Diego. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing while I'm on a tangent is you can always tell East Coasters are non-Californians because they say Cali. No Californian ever says Cali. You ever notice that?
Well, one of my friends that I work out with, he grew up in Detroit. He's like, oh yeah, it was almost at freezing temperatures. I'm like, what temperature is freezing? Like, you're such a Californian for not knowing.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's something you might never get to experience if you don't leave San Diego. So totally remember that from being out there. But anyway, it's great to have you on the show. I think we're both serving, the agency space, which is great because we have people from all walks of life on the show, all walks of business life, I should say. Mm-hmm. But it's great to compare notes with somebody like yourself that is working with, it sounds like hundreds of agencies, in any given month. And hundreds of individuals in this crazy marketing and ad space of ours. But before I go too far in that direction, for those that don't know you, would you mind talking a bit about your background and how you got to starting to do good work?
Yeah, absolutely. Right? Yeah. So from all the incubators and tests that I did in college and failures outside of college, I joined a program to try to start a software company that quickly turned into a marketing services company because the market that we were trying to serve needed more marketing support. Long story short, good friend of mine in Brooklyn and I teamed up. We never met in person. This was back in the day of Skype, if you remember those days before Zoom. Teamed up, created a company. Then we were growing, had a couple dozen clients. That was our first agency. And I think I was more in love with the doing, less of the running the agency at the time. It was my younger years and parted ways. And I started helping other digital agencies grow online. All the way from acquisitions to mergers to a larger merger or an acquisition where I help with the help of a team. No one can do it alone. We almost tripled an agency in the millions in less than a year. And that was a wild ride. And the mentor at the time or a coach at the time told me to write it down. Like, why write it down? What do I need to write down? It's like, just write it. So I wrote it and that became the first book, just more principles around growth and scale versus tactical. It's exactly what we did because the tactics are boring and simple. So I'd rather just look at the actual transcendentals. And then from there, I've been coaching and helping agencies. One of my longtime clients, I think we worked together for over 18 months. And when we started working together, we were helping make their first million. And then now that I know they're having 6-figure months and I couldn't be more happier than him. He's a good friend of mine and it's cool to see growth. And if you stick to it, you'll see that for yourself and for those around you.
Yeah, that's great. And I know that you've written a lot about these principles, but if there aren't too many of them, would you mind sharing them? And in particular, are there any that you feel like cut against the grain that, go against kind of the common knowledge that you hear?
Yeah, I think it's all about where you're at in stage of growth and revenue and team size that you apply different principles. I think the number one thing that I always, for me, it's logical and obvious, and this might be very logical and obvious to your audience, is when you're growing and scaling, the first initial hires are operations, not just more doers or not just more marketing and sales to grow the company. Marketing and sales is a constant depending on your pipeline. But I always look at how do we scale this operationally? Because we all go for the sexy J curve of scale is exponential, when in my opinion, true growth and true staggered growth is a staircase. You build, have the growth, maintain that growth, and have sustainability and profitability. And then you staircase up again. And that to me would be one of my, I wouldn't say it's too contrarian, but that would be one of my contrarian views around efficient growth, but also I care more about profitable growth and not burning out in the long run.
That makes sense. And I know that like we, for example, here at Sales Game, we had a huge last year. The beginning of this year feels slow. So it's like on one hand, the numbers feel worse, but on the upside, it feels like we're building out the infrastructure that will become a lot more sustainable than where we were previously. When we're talking about doing in the context of doing B2B lead gen and building out pretty advanced campaigns and all that sort of thing. So I want to dig into that a little bit. Like, what does it feel like when you are in the J curve, massive growth versus that sustainable kind of chugging along, building out tomorrow's infrastructure. What should that feel like? Like, what does that look like on the ground, both from your own experience and the clients that you've worked with?
So I'll bring the experience from actual working with clients or in-house and as well as with the agency. So for the J curve, you feel, I mean, it does feel like a fire hose, right? Where the supply and the demand are, there's more demand than there is supply. And I remember seeing one of my Thanksgiving, like the week of Thanksgiving, the calendar, I think it was like 12 Zoom calls jammed into each day as much as we could to be able to keep up with what's going on, the things that are happening, the changes, the execution, etc. So there's that, and that's not really sustainable. So that would be more what it would feel like in the exponential side. It also can be kind of chaotic where things aren't running correctly, but that's the typical work of when you're super busy. I think my grandfather had a saying. He used to run his own company. He had a saying that the shop that he worked at or that he owned would be messy and dirty when they were super busy because they don't have time to sweep. They don't have time to dust. They don't have time for that. And that's a good thing. So when you're actually going at the day to day, running pretty quickly, you're not going to have time for the small little things that are, it would be nice to have if you could do it, but it's not essential. When it comes to the, I wouldn't say staggered growth, but when it comes to like now you're growing sustainably, you're always managing for today and making sure that the ships run on time, that the clients are communicated with, that the team is happy, that they have the resources, the right trainings, like you're building for the future. But then there's also that 20% where you're buffering for what can happen or the possibility for the future. This is like the weightlifting or the muscle building or the running, the long-term health of the company where you're looking at other opportunities to potentially invest your time, your resources, your team. You're looking for extracurricular trainings that your team can take on to become better so that when an opportunity arises, you're not left empty-handed. You're not left like, oh, what am I supposed to do? So I think there's an ebb and flow to that, but definitely I like being more on the sustainable consistency versus trying to keep up. Both are fun. I think both are seasons, but I look for long-term sustainable.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I've heard different perspectives on those level off points and what you should be thinking about at each one of those stages. But can you define those if you can? What do those stages tend to look like? Are you thinking of them in terms of revenue or headcount or something else?
That's a great question. A lot of people think about them. I've been getting feedback that this should be around headcount, not just revenue. I just find revenue to be the easiest to measure. I actually created a little worksheet or a workbook around like here are the things to look at as you start building what I call a high profit agency. I aim for having higher profits of around 45%, 40% profitability. And that's just the goal as you hit seven figures, et cetera. The different stages are, I wouldn't call them staggering, but team sizes of 1 to 3, 3 to 5, 5 to 8, and so on. But the revenues around 120K to 360, 360 to 540, 720 to 1.2 million, 2 to 5 million, and 5 to 10 million. There's different needs at each stage. The bigger categories around each stage are bootstrapped in the very beginning between 100,000 to 500,000 a year. You're bootstrapped and you're building consistently. If you have outside funding, great. If you don't, I don't know of too many agencies actually that have outside funding unless they merge or got bought by private equity. But then once you reach the 500, 550, then you're in the growth section. And in growth, we're starting to focus on building micro agencies or micro task units within your actual workload themselves. And you're becoming more established in the marketplace. And then from growth at the 1.2 million mark, you become more boutique and more well-known in the marketplace. And this is where you can start unlocking more profitability in the agency. So there's essentially three different parts of every business. This isn't a gross like simplification, but it's just very simple that each company, including agencies, have marketing, operations, and the product. But the product is your labor and your people strategy. And as you go through each stage, you tell me how deep you want to go, but we can have very specific actions. Here's what you need to focus on in your marketing and sales at this stage. Here are some of the operational issues that you're looking at. And here's your people strategy, depending on the stages that you're at. And they all come with different burnout factors, peace of mind for the founder, and quality score, because the goal of the agency is to deliver quality products and services. The product, again, being the labor, the output, the results that the clients are getting, depending on the stage that you're at.
Yeah, that's great. And there's a lot of different places to go with it. I guess so you're talking about burnout, you talked about quality score, you talked about profitability. And this is probably an unfair question, but if you have to pick just one of those indicators and you're blind to the rest, which one are you picking?
Profitability. because you can design for profit from day one. You may not reach that immediately from day one, but the design of the infrastructure can be built out where you are profitable in the long haul and you can scale with that foundation. The way that I do that is what I build what I call task units. And every single task unit has essentially three core elements. And these are people, these are not roles, these are types of people. The first type of person is a driver, someone who breathes life into the campaign, to the client, to the team. They develop strategy, they develop relationship. Their main focus and KPI is the results for the clients and the customer lifetime value. The second type of person is the operator, the one who gets the timings on time, the deadlines, the shipments, everything that's necessary to happen. They're usually project managers. They could be account managers. They're managing the client. They're having communications with the client, but they're getting everything aligned so that whatever strategy the driver has can be executed. We're looking at potential risks, potential issues, potential roadblocks. Then the final type of person is a specialist. This is the person who is actually implementing the key deliverables, if that's email, if that's ad spend, if that's funnel building, if that's sales strategy. They're building out the actual very specific pieces. And usually when you start in the beginning, that could be all you or a very limited amount of people. But as you build task units, you have a driver at the top, an operator supporting that driver, but you can have multiple specialists. And each specialist can have a certain bandwidth of how many clients they can take on. And the
Right.
goal is to capture how much revenue are these pods managing? What is the cost of overhead to manage these pods, taking into your actual overhead cost for your company, looking at the P&L. And then from there, designing what is the pricing that I need to have in order to be above 30%, above 35%, above 40, 45% profitability. And if you design from the get-go there, your opportunity to scale is you have ability to scale in three different ways. You can scale by duplication, take this pod and create a new pod. You can scale horizontally, where you can add more specialists per pod, which means that the driver is managing more people. Or you can scale vertically, where you add more clients per specialist. And you're not scaling the team, you're just scaling client load and efficiencies. And the cool thing is now with the rise of technologies that we're seeing with all the AI tools, like 1,000 new tools every week, you can really hone in on efficiencies to have the team either take on more or be able to execute low-level tasks that would take a human to do. And now you don't have to have a human do that. There's multiple ways to identify and manage scale, but we look at efficiencies, team, labor, operational efficiencies. We look at your pricing. How are you positioned in the marketplace? What are the problems that you actually solve? How can we position ourselves to solve bigger problems or add more value to the marketplace and charge accordingly? Then the final is around the volume of clients that you have. What type of agency do you want to be running? Do you want to have a churn and burn, hundreds of clients, 50 clients plus, or do you want to have a nice boutique little agency where you have a very select number of clients who pay you premium?
Right. And I think it's definitely a mix for our listenership, but it probably skews a little more towards the latter. And I've found that it's a lot less of an emotional roller coaster with the latter. It's super interesting, and there's a lot to dig into there. And I think one thing that's particularly interesting and different is like the level of granularity you have to those level off points, right? You mentioned like 720 to 1.5 and some others like that. What's happening at each one of those levels and why that level of granularity, and how does the pod change or affect that?
I think the reason that I wanted to do that is just to have a real clear roadmap for anyone in the journey. Because if you tell people that, hey, between now and 500,000, it's all going to be the same, that's never true. The way that you hire at 500,000 is different from when you hire when you're at 5 million. The types of people that you hire. So there, I think we can start contrasting or comparing, contrasting the different pieces. In the beginning, for marketing and sales, is an evolution. The beginning, you're taking on anyone who you can and anyone who has a problem that you can solve. As you move up the ranks, you start taking on and selling not just a solution, but you're selling a transformation. And as you go up at the higher end of the spectrum, you're selling relationship, you're selling access. And it's different from, oh, you have a problem, I got a solution. Let's work together. Because then they can price shop and they can find whoever can do the work at the cheapest amount. But if you're selling relationship, access, security, or peace of mind, which some agencies or one of my clients were positioning that way, You're selling less the transformation, which is mid-tier. You're selling more transformation and relationship, something that I couldn't get access to unless I had a relationship with you. Same thing with your hiring. In the beginning, you're hiring people who can fill a need immediately. But as you move up the revenue chain, you're also hiring based on talent, experience. Am I paying more for a specific outcome? Am I paying more for someone who can think? Am I paying more for someone who can actually do the work without me needing to micromanage them?
Yeah.
So each one of these, the marketing, what you're selling, how you're selling it, who is selling it, the operations, and the people strategy change as you move up these different levels. And I just didn't think it was ethical or fair to tell agency owners that between 0 to 500,000, it's all the same. No, there's different, you can stack it different ways, and seeing how the evolution happens.
Yeah, that's really interesting and compelling. So the idea that at different tiers you have solving a problem, transformation, and access. Not to put you on the spot, but would it be possible to talk about either a client you've worked with, or it doesn't have to be one you've worked with, just one out there in the ether that has climbed that ladder, or maybe a brand that we might know about or something like that? Because I'd love to visualize different companies kind of serving each one of those needs.
Yeah, I mean, I like to speak mostly from experience and not give theoreticals, and more like, hey, here's what's happening. Here's what I
Yeah.
can add value. So actually, one of my clients, the team that I helped scale up in 2019. I'm not sure if we would like to conceal the name, but essentially we started with 7 people, and then we were at 20. Now we're at about 50, and the goal is to probably continue to scale up to 8 figures. And the reason being, like the evolution there, a lot of the issues can be boiled down to, and I'm using air quotes if you can't see the video, to leadership and or talent. So, I mean, what can we dive into, or what do you want to specifically?
Yeah, the thing that I found really interesting is the idea of going from like transformation to selling access, the different ways that that can pan out, because solving a problem, that's straightforward. I think most of our clients, most of the people listening are solving, a given marketing problem.
Yeah.
Transformation is like, it's the classic, don't sell a painkiller, you could sell a vitamin, right? Where it's like, instead of just solving this problem, you're going to become a better person. You're going to increase your ab strength so you don't have
Mhm.
back pain, as opposed to just taking a painkiller to get rid of the back pain. But selling access, I think that is probably murkier to lots of our listeners. So I'd love to understand that a little bit and just kind of how you've seen that play out.
Yeah. So I'll give you also examples from one of my nonprofit clients who are working with their agency. The nonprofit client, they're selling hands, they're selling execution, and that to me, and they're positioned as results and outcomes, but the deliverables are actual hands. So that actually lowers the value that we're receiving, or that you're seeing that you're receiving from them, because you can, if you're just getting hands to do the work, the question is, I can just get another team at the lowest dollar amount to do this for me, right? So when you're selling a transformation or an outcome, you're almost hinging on the actual outcome itself. So the way that the agency client is positioning is, at the end of X amount of months, we're adding an extra top line revenue of, name out a number, whatever is fitting for the client. Let's say it's an extra 6 figures in top line rev for the client. And the goal is hinging on, that's the core transformation. Here's the core timeline. Here are the things that we're going to do to hit that number. And that's the transformation piece. When it comes to a level of relationship or access, a lot of agencies don't talk about cybersecurity risk. They just don't. A lot of people don't think about that. But if in this particular case, the client building out a cybersecurity arm to support, so any passwords, logins, support, team members who work on the account are secure and have a cybersecurity plan, the client themselves now gets under that sort of umbrella. Like, if something were to happen, here is our like mitigation plan, and here's exactly what's going to happen. Where if you were to have issues, or if your customers went down and had an issue with your CRM that we helped set up, we got you covered. Or if you have, let's say they need sales, a lot of agencies for marketing are great at delivering marketing qualified leads, but the client themselves sucks at taking the MQL and converting it to an SQL in the sales process. Here's a relationship that we have with a sales professional or a sales team or a sales platform that can help you based on the relationship that we have. And we can, it's almost like a joint venture, but work with the client at different ends of the spectrum. So when you buy into an agency, you're buying into a relationship. You're not just getting one job done. You're getting all support from trusted partners. I used to work in finance and in the banking world. The goal was to move as much money as you can from one bank to the other. So you build a relationship with someone, try to move $250,000 into the new bank account. But the goal isn't just to move the money. The goal is you come here, now you have financial planning, tax strategy, trust strategy, credit card strategy, like the whole nine around a specific individual. And that's the goal with the agency as well, is like what other problems will they encounter when you solve their problem, and building almost like a moat or a castle around them. So if they leave you, they're also leaving nine other things, and that creates a stickiness to the relationship. And that's what we want.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that the process of going from transformation problem solving to that is, yeah, again, a little bit murky, but and it's subtle. What I found is that selling that is more subtle and harder for people to wrap their heads around than selling, hey, you've got this problem, I'm going to solve it. So I,
Mhm.
I guess this might not have one easy answer. So I might be setting you up a little bit, but how do you do that? Like, how do you go from selling transformation to selling access? Is this something that you can wake up in the morning and build a deck and be at it? Or is this something that happens from years of positioning and trust building and brand building and all that good stuff?
I think it's both at the same time. I mean, I think you're asking for like, what's the practical thing right now that I can do after listening to this pod?
Even when I don't want to do that, I end up doing that. So anyway.
I would look at right now, like as you're listening to this, who is your ideal client specifically? And when you solve their problem, what other problems do they have? That's like the classic upsell formula, right? But when you look at those issues that they currently have, by working with you, what are some of the ways that you can help alleviate those pains, either by providing it directly as an additional service, white labeling, JV partnerships, strategic relationships, and or working with a firm who can then it's actually that would be the white label. But the whole idea is like, how can they work with you and have a stickiness? Going back to the finance experience, when you look at a bank, and I know we're talking about banking, trust me, it'll turn around quickly. When we look at banks, they all do the same thing. We have the top four banks in the US on every street corner, and actually even across the street. What's the difference? They know that. What's the difference? They build out strategically sticky products. They give you specific deposit accounts, direct deposit, credit cards, banking, mobile app, mobile banking, merchant processing, all of these little things to make it difficult so that if you were to leave, it's like, oh, I can't leave because I have my direct deposit set up, or I have this credit card premium program with them because of my merchant service or whatever. You, in essence, are building the same thing, not because you're thinking in the worst case scenario, but like, hey, they're going to leave. I know their LTV is probably between 12 to 18 months. They're going to leave. We might as well make it hard for them to leave. You don't want to make it hard for them to leave. What you want to do is I find additional avenues to create value that sticks with you even after they're gone, or if they do decide to leave, that it's like it's a difficult thing for them to say no to. For some clients, they offer white labeled merchant services. So even if the client does leave, the agency does have a split on the commissions or whatever the merchant processing fees that they get. So if the client leaves or whatever, they have access to that and they still get recurring revenue. It isn't a way for you to make most of a relationship. I think it's a different modality of thinking advantageously to thinking how can I add the most value. And I think that subtlety in that change is how we want to be looking at the relationship to be able to sell or grant access to different relationships, different partners, as well as different value adds. And it's
Yeah.
not like a simple answer, but I think it's a way of how you look at the answer that matters the most.
Yeah, no, I think that's really useful. And it's the idea of once they solve this problem, what other problems arise, and then going from there. I know another topic that's related that you write and talk a lot about is the idea of productizing. And that's one of those things where I think if I talk to five different people, I get five different definitions of productized and
Mhm.
what that means. So I guess my first question is, can you define like what productizing means to you? And also, let me just start there before I muddy the waters too much.
So productizing is taking a service or a deliverable that you already have and getting 80% of it when a client comes through, that it's systematically going to be delivered. And the 80% being that you have 20% of customization. So it doesn't mean that every client is unique in and of their own. If you're solving a similar problem for multiple, it's in your best interest to make it a very streamlined process. I know some people say productizing is making a course, doing group programs, coaching, or whatever. you can, but the whole idea is having a back-end operations that fulfills on the promise, giving you the opportunity to scale whichever way you see fit. If it does mean creating group programs or coaching, then yes. But my goal is more about having a stack of, let's say, your 5 best services productized. And then when you're pitching a client, almost combining or packaging them in sort of different ways where it feels like the solution is bespoke, when in really 80% of it isn't. Just that 20 or 5% of customization is. And when you do that, you can change the positioning, you can change your price points, and you can solve bigger problems versus I'll just do your SEO for you. I'll just run your ads for you. I'll just build a funnel for you, which I can get for $10 an hour.
Right. And it's only going to get cheaper with AI, which we'll probably get to in a second. But I guess to kind of go back to the access topic, right? So if
Mhm.
you're selling a productized service and you're like, hey, we do these few services really, really well. How is the glass of milk presented? As in, when you give a mouse a cookie, they're going to want a glass of milk. Are you saying, hey, we're going to get you this glass of milk down the road, and you're saying that from day one, or are you introducing these things as they're needed? Like, how does the productization versus the access-based positioning kind of mesh together, if that makes any sense?
It would really tie into your sales process. Does your audience like to do multiple sales for a close? Is it a 1-2 call sales?
It's probably going to be multiple calls. Yeah.
Yeah, I would always seed it in the beginning, but mostly with discovery, you're reaching out and identifying what are the core issues first. If you have a second call for presentation, then you can hit it on there as well. Like, we can do this, but I would always hint at it and precede the idea that it's there for them, because that gives you automatic authority and positioning during the conversation to guide them towards the best result or the best package or offering that you have. And that's how I would approach it. Does that help answer or hit
It
that question?
does. That's good. And I do want to move on to other topics. So I know I've focused on access a lot, but just to kind of finish things off there a little bit more, what are the better clients you're working with doing to create more stickiness? For example, like, anybody can make intros or have white label partners, but what are the better people doing to actually make that sticky? Because, you can make an intro, your client goes works with somebody else to solve this problem, but then they still stop working with you to solve whatever problem they were dealing with you. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
So stickiness is a range of things. It's not just one thing. One of the clients, I'm trying to move them away from having this positioning, but they also do a certain amount of tech and creative on top of the services. And for the client's point of view, it's like, oh, you're doing this for me and you're doing my tech and my creative. If I were to leave, that would really suck for me. So that there is that stickiness factor there. The other stickiness factor is white labeled software. It's another key piece of supporting and getting the client what they need. It isn't just one thing, like I mentioned earlier with the banking example. It's around all these multiple factors that are surrounding that one individual or that one client to support them. One of the interesting things, I was speaking with an agency owner who's worked with some bigger brands, well-known brands and software companies, and he mentioned this interesting observation that as agencies, clients are always trying to find how to lower your bill. But if you position yourself as performance based, they don't care. If they are investing 5 and they get 10 back, that to them is still a return. So it's from his perspective all around how you position what you're doing versus, oh, I'm going to try to lower my agency spend this month because I just don't like giving them, 6 figures in monthly retainer. I can do it all in house, or I can find a way to not work with them. So I think it's all around that the positioning of how you have the conversation, how you present your solutions, as well as if you decide to do performance based. And I've not focused primarily on that with my agency clients. There's difficulty around that, but that would be an opportunity to look at for true stickiness.
That makes sense. And one thing that you mentioned just now that I think is interesting is the concept of like white label software. And regardless of software, I love to hear your opinion. Like, what's your opinion of skunkworks projects? Should agencies be doing them at all times and having this fun little side project that they're building that could be something big? Like, should that be, is that important? Is it a distraction? How you decide, and how does your opinion exist in context of those stages that you mentioned earlier?
I was actually doing research on that and talking to a few agency owners around that, because I had a gentleman on the pod. They did SEO in terms of a service. They pivoted to become a SaaS software, and now they're scaling rapidly because of their SaaS offering. I've had another bespoke agency out of, I think, Dubai, and they have higher end services, but they productize the service to be super low retainer work, but monthly recurring, almost like a middle ground between SaaS and services. And the goal, obviously, that it moves up the chain. And I've had a third gentleman who is a high end website builder, very expensive website builder, but he has what I think what you refer to as a skunk group project of a platform and a marketplace to create white label relationships and connect clients with potential agencies, and also a training associated. So there's info product on top of that. In my opinion, I think is essential for any business practically to do R&D. What are the trends in my marketplace that are happening in my specific industry? What are the trends in the future? What am I seeing that I can create? And spending 10, 20% of your time on top, obviously, if you're scaling up, getting through the scaling phase, but spending 10 to 20% of your time of what are some of the trends and opportunities that we have within ourselves. And you could create a software company, you could create a platform, you could create a platform as a service, a marketplace, a community, an info product. I think there's a lot of opportunity right now. And thankfully, given the new trends of technology, I think only the stronger agencies are going to be sticking around because they have strong relationships and or positioning in the marketplace.
Right. They've already figured out where the gold lives in terms of like where the core problems live for any given, customer base. So that all makes sense. And to shift gears to a buzzworthy cliche topic that, you and I are probably discussing a lot on shows like this is, yeah, let's talk about AI. Let's talk about like where your clients seeing value from it. Where has it been useful? Where is it hype and BS? Would love to hear your take.
So I think right now we're obviously in the very beginnings. I did a mini course, mini thesis around the agency AI and how if you look at the agency business model from a holistic point of view, then AI plays a very specific role in client delivery. It can really take over a lot of onboarding and supporting and communication and redundancy tasks that way. It can help with your pricing if you want to have more efficiencies with your teams. You can actually shift your pricing. One of our good buddies in a mastermind, he runs a podcast agency, and in his agency, his prices are ridiculously low. Like they're not like cheap. It's not cheap, but it's not like expensive. And the reason that he can do that is because he's leveraging AI in the entire delivery. He has some team members, but a lot of AI doing the heavy lifting. And the cool thing is that changes his positioning in the marketplace. People want to work with him because he can do that. And the price point is like a no brainer. It's not cheap where it's like, I don't get value, and it's not too expensive saying, why would I pay 10 grand for this? So there's different ways that you can leverage it, but looking at the client journey as an example, marketing and sales, we already know that it can help you increase your volume with lowering your puts. For client onboarding, it can support depending on your client onboarding. If you have task-based things that are recurring and can be automated, it is mostly like automation. On some delivery, I would look at it for potentially when I look at teams and we start stacking business models and teams and reviewing the exposure to AI. Copywriting definitely has high exposure. Media buying has some exposure to it. Website design has some exposure to it. Design definitely does now that Adobe Firefly came out. Creative has exposure to it because you can now create and not buy stock photos and be able to ship ideas pretty quickly. The whole idea though is it's not a perfect output. You do need to know how to work with the technology. And an enthusiast and a good friend of mine who's tinkering in this day in and day out, building little web apps. It's less important the tools that are out there and more important right now to understand which tool to use and how it actually works, like the logic behind it. Because once you understand that, then you can like actually unlock the power of how to get the best outputs from an input. So
Yeah.
I know that's very vague in theory of what I just mentioned, but right now where we're at, the two key skill sets, in my opinion, will continue to be thinking and the proper facilitation of thinking. So what does thinking mean? Strategy. AI right now builds on top of an existing knowledge base. A knowledge base is ideas captured in the past to the present moment or whatever custom knowledge base you create. Anything new or anything new idea you can put into the knowledge base and it'll build something from that. However, it cannot think of possibility of the future and what could be. It doesn't have the idea for potentiality. So if in philosophy, there's a potential act and an actual act. This is because, I mean, this is more of a philosophical standpoint, is what is consciousness and can AI be conscious? And I think a really good podcast conversation was with Mark Andreessen, saying that it's very difficult to crank the consciousness code because we actually don't even know what's going on in our brains for consciousness as scientists. So with that primer in mind, I personally don't believe that AI will get to the point where it can create net new ideas and thinking outside of an existing knowledge base. But it can be pretty darn good at doing tasks that are white collar. So that's the thinking piece. Well, thinking's great, but it's worthless if it's not put into action. So the second high value skill is taking a strategy and idea and facilitating that with real humans, real stakeholders, real clients into time and actuality. And those are the two most important pieces. The hands, the fingers, the button pushing is getting commoditized every single day. We can
Yeah.
get it for really cheap. We can have very high talented, well qualified, highly trained outsourced talent. And some AI tools are executing the button pushing significantly better and cheaper than most humans. So where does that leave us? That leaves us with thinking and execution. We'll see where it takes us from here, but that's kind of where we're at in this point in time in 2023.
Yeah, and it's funny because we don't really know what consciousness is for humans, but we also don't know what it would be for an AI. We don't really know. Well, all we know is an input and then an output, but nothing that really happens in between, with the AI itself. So it's hard to define what consciousness would even look like. But I guess, without going too far into philosophy, and to ask a more specific Tim Ferriss like tactical question, like what are those tools? Like what are the sorts of tools that your clients are using or that you're using every day that are allowing people to charge a gazillion percentage points less? And how is that playing out?
We're still testing that out. So
Yeah.
almost every popular tool is not out of the picture. Just test it out. It's more around how are you priming the AI with the right information to produce the right output. I hate the word and I really detest the job title. I think it'll be outdated. Network manager of prompt engineering. That's not really. It's more about a skill
Just
set,
yeah.
less than a job title. It's more about what are you inputting and how are you asking it to think. And that
Yeah.
does take time to trial and test. The obvious ones, Stable Diffusion, GPT. Right now, I'm personally figuring out creating a custom knowledge base where I can have very specific inputs and outputs for the work that I already do. So I want to create like a consulting co-pilot working at 80% of the thinking done for you so that the 20% is high leveraged thinking and execution. Because think about it, strategy is a repeatable process. If you feed it the right intel and the right IP, anyone can come up with strategy. So that's personally what I'm working on within clients. It's just looking at very specific job roles and looking at all the outputs that you're doing. For example, for your tech team, your creative team, your media team, whatever teams you have, what are the very specific outputs and what are all the possibilities that they can be outputting? Then from there, looking at what are the inputs that we can derive from, or what are the resources we already have, our SOPs, our trainings, our best practices, proven ads, proven landing pages, whatever. Then from there, distilling what tools help me solve this problem and going from the highest friction to the lowest friction in terms of the use case solve. And when you do that, now you have a framework of execution versus, hey, here's the number one hot tool to use, this tool that tomorrow, as you listen to this, could be obsolete or gone out of business.
Yeah, and I think with that, it's interesting how many of the tools require you to do demo with a human first,
Yeah.
just to figure out how to use them, which I find like kind of ironic. But I guess those demos are happening for a reason, so that all makes sense. And Raul, I guess kind of getting towards the end of our time here, what are you excited about? Like, what's the next big project with your consultancy or beyond?
I'm trying to scale my brain. So doing more speaking, podcasts, the books and shipping and sponsoring events. But really the most exciting is what I mentioned to you is how do I create a co-pilot consultant internally first for me? Like how do I do the work that I do and have that speed up and have higher quality and higher accuracy because I wouldn't be tired instead of being tired and doing it. And for me to be focused on the most exciting strategy pieces for clients and customizing things, that's super exciting because that can be created into some sort of community, some sort of, I don't think it's a software play. We'll figure that out. But I feel like this is the future for a lot of people who think for a living. How do you create your own co-pilot to support you so that you really focus on the 80 or the 20% that matter the most of your thinking that an AI cannot do?
Yeah, the emergent properties. Right. So that all's super interesting, and we'll have to talk about it again. And where can people go to get in touch and follow what you're up to and all that good stuff?
The best place is the website, dogoodwork.io/DAG for Digital Agency Growth Podcast.
Nice. Good on you for creating a custom URL. So appreciate it. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, sir.
Appreciate it, Dan. Thanks.